Hello, this is Frank Falvey with Frank Presents, and today I have the privilege of welcoming Sara-Lynn Reynolds.
Hi.
I get that right?
You did get it right.
And Sarah, you're running for the State Senate here in Franklin and in Bristol and Norfolk and
It's actually the Norfolk, Bristol, Middlesex region. So there's segments of Franklin. Franklin itself, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7
precincts.
The other precincts are held by Karen Spilka.
Yeah.
Senator
And
Karen.
you're running as a Democrat in
Yes.
the Democratic primary.
Yes, that's
And
correct.
Sarah, where did you grow up?
I actually grew up locally in North Attleboro. That's where I was raised. I went to public schools there, junior high, elementary, high school, and graduated from North Attleboro High School, and from there went on to UMass Amherst, where I graduated with a degree in health education.
That's a big campus out there.
Oh, it was. It was a huge campus. I think even back then it had about 25,000 people. So, you know, it's amazing because you leave a small house, or, well, I was actually the second oldest of 8 children, so it wasn't a small household.
Oh.
But you leave that small community feel and you go to a school with a campus as large as UMass Amherst, and you realize, even though it's a bunch of people your own age, you know, and so it's a whole different mindset, but you realize that the world is pretty huge, that there's a lot of people and things that you were not aware of, and so it changes, you know, your socialization and the patterns that you might have consistently grown up with.
Yeah, yeah. Did you participate in any other extracurricular activities, or?
You know, at the time, I actually finished college in closer to 3 years than 4. I was trying to get out and get a job.
Yeah.
It was difficult then. So I was really doubling up on my classes. When everyone was taking 3, I was taking 7. You know,
I mean, during the summer?
I went a couple of times during the summer, yes. I went to, and in fact, during one of the summer semesters, I went to Bridgewater and commuted back and forth from my home. My reason for doing that is, at the time there was a health position, a health/physical education position opening up at the junior high school in my town, and I wanted that job. And so I thought, well, I need to get out, you know, a year earlier, or at least 6 months earlier, to get that position and get my student teaching in as well. And so that's what I did. And I was fortunate. I did get that position and taught at the junior high level and coached at both. Yes, yes. Everyone says that, but I did love it. You know, it is probably an easier position for young, coming out of college teachers to address, because, you know, you're not totally different in age. I mean, there's maybe a 10-year spurt, but you're still understanding of where they're coming from. And of course, being the second oldest of 8, I had a lot of younger brothers and sisters, and in fact, the two very youngest were in my classes, because that's how much younger they were at the time than me. So I had them in my classroom, and I coached at the high school level.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
And what did you coach?
I coached women's sports, field hockey, which I absolutely loved, basketball, and softball.
Great.
Yeah,
great.
yeah. We were pretty well-rounded, did a lot. For a while, I was the cheerleading coach as well. So, you know, I got involved in anything that was physical activity and involved, you know, trying to get young people to be more involved in activities and understand that even though you could be good at a sport, you know, you were a natural athlete maybe, it was more important to know that it was about the team effort. You know, coming together and understanding that everything was more than just about one person, it was about a group of people.
And then later on, you did some work in the health area with tobacco and...
Yes,
and,
yes, that was my, you know, I was fortunate. I again, came from a large family. Everyone smoked. A lot of my friends smoked. I think that my generation was the first that kind of questioned whether it was really healthy, and started thinking about whether that was, you know, I used to think to myself, oh my God, would you walk into a burning building and breathe in? You know, would you want your child to be breathing this in? You know, so I was fortunate in that I never smoked. So when the opportunity arose at the Mass Department of Public Health and we received all of these tobacco monies, I was lucky that I had been hired on through a grant with the Mass Department of Public Health to work in Attleboro. From there, I was the first, Attleboro was the first town, so myself along with Jim Mooney, who was the health agent at the time, we put into place regulations, the first of its kind, the first tobacco regulations and policy in Attleboro, and that is what really got me into enjoying policy making. From there, I went into the Mass Department of Public Health and became a regional field director for all of southeastern Mass, and I did that.
Tell me a little about the money that the state of Massachusetts received as part of the settlement from the tobacco. Is that money now all spent?
No, there is money that still comes in, and there was a great deal of money, but the programs have been slashed tremendously. There's a few still, but by 2000...
Where did they redirect the money to?
A general fund.
Really? General fund?
Oh yeah, general fund. Lots of that money at one time, and that's why, you know, I'm a firm believer that if money comes in from a certain area, it should stay in a certain area. That always was upsetting to me, that the money didn't just go to the health department, which obviously could have used the money, or stayed in tobacco or other drug abuse programs that we could have used it.
If elected, would you redirect that money?
I'd like to find ways to do it, because I think it happens even so at the local level, that sometimes, you know, you collect dollars for a certain thing, and then, you know, it starts to get redirected if you get a new mayor or a new town manager, and, you know, those funds that are coming from a certain area do not necessarily go where people originally had hoped they would go. So yes, I'd like to look into that and see if we could do that.
You may not be aware of this, but in the lottery, there's $78 million that says it goes to arts, but it doesn't go to arts.
No.
It goes to the general fund.
Yeah.
And the general fund uses it so the arts never get it. And only $2 million goes to addiction prevention or gambling addiction programs. Only $2 million out of, I don't know, how many
multiples.
Millions.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the system has gotten away from us to some degree, and that there needs to be new ways of looking at how the money is spent, and is it being spent in a way that we can actually identify good practice, best practice, and know that it's actually happening, that these things are providing good outcomes for us. And it's not really about the people that are working in those programs. They're good people. They're all working hard. But the system itself either isn't getting enough funding. It's like the arts. Having been an educator myself, I fully believe that you have to keep the arts in the schools. That's what makes everybody so well-rounded. You know, you can't just have, it goes back to just this system of testing. It so does not allow for people to be innovative in their own right, or creative. You know, so many students learn in so many different ways that I think we have to relook at what we are identifying as the most important things, and are we allowing our students to grow in a manner that gets them to be in a national limelight, not just locally. You know?
Well, the core curriculum programs that are coming down the line in English and mathematics, along with the tests that go along with that program, do you support that program?
You know, I support it more than I would of the MCAS, you know, but I think it goes back to that whole line of reasoning, is that testing is not just the issue, that we need to have other ways to identify whether our students are doing well, because a lot of young people, a lot of senior people, a lot of middle-aged people that are trying to get readjusted into new ways of learning, that kind of testing doesn't work. And they could very well be very good at what they do, but they cannot pass that kind of a test. And so I think it leaves out a lot of people, and that's where I have some issues.
Sarah, do you have children?
I do. I have 2 boys that are now grown, the loves of my life. They are now grown and married. One lives locally in Massachusetts. The other one lives right over the line in New Hampshire. Both went to the same college and public school college, only in New Hampshire. It was Keene State College. They met their wives there, and they both have 2 children and are fortunate. They're working and have good jobs, and for that I'm very thankful.
Great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What else in the healthcare area do you have a particular interest in, or you have experience in?
Well, I mean, I've kind of run the gamut. I started with young people, and worked around the issues that young people might have. And, addiction has always been a strong issue with me, around alcohol and drug abuse. And I think that we need to pay attention to that. I have a real fondness for senior issues. That's what I've been working in the last several years. And I think that we need to find ways to do more for our senior population, that these people have given a great deal of their time and their life to working in this country, and now when they need us the most, we're letting them down. And because of the way the financial system collapsed, many of them lost pensions, they lost savings, they are struggling with health care costs, and we're not necessarily doing as good as we could do. Yes, Massachusetts probably does better than most, but we could always do a lot better than we are doing.
Heroin seems to be coming to the forefront, and there seems to be in Massachusetts a very serious heroin problem. Do you believe it is a serious problem?
I think that people that don't think it is are not paying attention, or if they don't believe that it's a problem, they don't know young people. And by young people, I mean anybody that's leaving college, even in high school. Young people can be in their late 30s, moving through, and they're leaving school with no opportunities for a job. They got addicted maybe because alcohol no longer was something they could afford, and heroin is something you can afford. And it's pretty plentiful by all indication. If you were looking for it, you could easily find it. I know families that are struggling with a young person in their family that is addicted, in their 30s, some that are 18, and I think we need to take the stigma away from it, because so many of those people that I know are trying to hide it. They don't want someone to know because they think it's their fault as a parent. But it's not. It's not. It could be any one of our family members, children, that get addicted to this. It's highly addictive, and when it happens, we need to show support to these families.
Well, what do we need to do on a state level? I see the budget is increased for new programs in that area, but are there specific things that we aren't doing that we should be doing?
Well, I think that we're starting to address it. That's the thing. It always, when it gets to the point that you need to, instead of trying to be proactive, which it had we started these programs 5-10 years ago when people started talking about it. But I think now that we're where we are, we need to really be sure that we're educating young people not to just say no. We tried that. It works for some. It doesn't work for all. So I think that what you want to do now is make sure that if somebody doesn't say no, that you're there. You're there. I don't think throwing them in prison, sticking them there and then letting them out, not really addressing why they got into that, or sticking them in prison, I'm not sure that works. I think that there has to be other ways, educational ways to address, not just with the person that's addicted, but with the family members, so that they know how to deal with it instead of trying to hide it or feel shameful about it. How do we make people realize that this is no different than someone being on alcohol, which we finally have realized is a disease, and we try to work people through that situation as well.
Sarah, the Senate budget is much bigger than the House budget, and the Senate budget is described as adding new programs because new money has come in. If you had a choice between paying off bills that we owe, like in every city and town, we owe millions upon millions for pensions. Would you pay bills we already owe, or would you support new programs like the Senate bill might end up doing?
That's a touchy one, and it can be difficult to answer. Obviously, I would always like to see us pay the bills if we could. I don't think that we can just pay them exclusively and ignore the ones that now come up, because, generationally things change, and we might not have put money, in case in point, into drug addiction. We might not have that need, and now we definitely need to address that. So I think that more what we have to do is look at where the money's being spent now that we're not getting a return on, and find a way to cut those programs that are not working and readdress them, restructure them, so that we can actually say, hey, we're getting something from this program. We're putting this money here and we're getting this money out. Or to say at least that with the budget being the kind of large that it is, larger than the House budget is, well, where do we need to, where we have the highest pensions, first of all, should be that clearly we should address those, because a lot of the pension funds that are not funded at least up to 75%, they're very low and they could possibly fail. I think
I'm talking about town pension
yes,
funds
I
now.
am too. I mean, but I think that knowing, and the state knows and localities know, that a lot of those pensions are failing, even worse than they might have been before, because of what happened in the financial crisis. So it seems unbelievable to me, or at least in the Senate, and maybe even higher than our Senate, state Senate, but the congressional district should be looking at ways that those financial institutions that put us in this bind and cause those pension funds to slice down should be putting that money back in. The banks are increasing their take. They're doing better than they were doing before the financial hit. So they should be halving in some way, just like in the foreclosure issue process that we're working on now. They should still be paying that money back to keep these pensions where they would have been had the banks not collapsed in the manner that they did, doing things that were, dashed I say, illegal, close to the line of illegal.
I may fault the banks for a lot, but I'm not sure that I follow your logic, and
Okay.
and it seems to me that we're in a situation that eventually cities and towns can't address this issue of funding the pension and continue to put the money they are in education.
Well, they can't. Well, okay. So it's two-tiered. I think that some of the pension funds, because some of the programs, the pensions, the localities themselves, put money into particular funds that failed, and that had a lot to do with what was going on with the big banks.
No,
Yeah.
it had something.
Well, a segment.
But
But again, I agree with you that we are now at a point where there are a lot of people, and we cannot continue to fund at this level, is what you're saying. I agree with that. But I do not believe that for 1 minute that we should take from seniors that were expecting it and have put in all of their life, the amount of money they thought they were going to put in, and that they should get something. I think the pension system obviously has to be readdressed, and that we have to change it up for the new people coming in, so that it would be different. They might pay higher themselves than the people that are before them. But the people before them were giving this particular scenario. And that's what they plan to retire with. They have no Social Security. They've made some adjustments in the way some things happen by saying, when you reach a certain age, if you have Social Security, that's got to count towards it. But what about those people that, went right into city government at 18?
you were on the Attleboro City Council. What is it that you bring as a result of being on that council that you'd like to see addressed in the Senate?
I think that one of the things that I started to see are some things that are happening with the school systems, how the money has been cut from the school systems based on obviously sharing that money now with the charter schools, and the charter schools are we're not necessarily checking their mandates and making sure that they're doing all the things that the public schools are, and they should be, so I mean, that's one of the things we need to address, and which I was unaware of or closely followed before I was on the city council. I think that we need to watch where the money is going, because everybody's tightening their belts now, and obviously transportation issues are a big one too, that you finally realize, well, how are we going to pay for these things? So a lot of people want to see improvements, but there's no money. There's just no money. So how do you make that happen? This might be considered not something people want, but maybe there needs to be a new format for a tax program. Maybe we're not taxed at a higher rate, or maybe the tax could be.
Are you in favor of graduated income?
I think we need to look at it. Yeah.
I mean, that would take a a constitutional amendment.
It would, but I mean, I definitely think you're in a point that we're looking at the middle, what used to be a middle class that basically doesn't really exist much more. I think that you need to look at what's happening and make that tax rate something that is beneficial and supportive of everybody that works, because we have a lot of working class poor. So every little dime that they make might add up to $20,000 a year, and there's 2 to 4 people living in the household. How can that possibly support them paying additional, even if it's only a tax of $2,000 a year? That's a lot of money. You know, that's a lot of money for someone that makes $20,000. So I think that we do need to look at those opportunities for graduated tax, but make it fair. Make it really fair for the amount of money, and that tax should be based on not the gross, but what comes, you know, the adjusted gross income, you know, what that is after you take everything out, you know. So I mean, I think it's important that we start looking at those kinds of things, yes.
What do you see in the, you know, you mentioned seniors, okay. Mm-hmm. One of my pet peeves is, you know, as a man getting older, mm-hmm. I seem to look for rest stops, and the rest stops in Massachusetts seem to be closed, mm-hmm. and the restrooms don't seem to be open. Mm-hmm. That seems to be a priority to me, mm-hmm. And a practical priority. Why are the rest stops closed?
You know, I can't answer why they're closed because I don't know, but I know I've walked into the same situation if I've traveled a long distance and I go, oh my God, why do we have a rest stop? And I would assume it's that they say that they consider it recreational more than they consider it a need, but it is a need. I mean, if people are traveling, it is a need unless you happen to be on a bus. So if enough people, I guess, made a stink about it, pardon the expression, but if enough people did, I think that they'd have to look into those kinds of things, but they probably don't have enough people to keep someone there, to do the upkeep, the overall cleanliness of the place. But why not? Again, it falls back to what are we doing with our budget? Are we really paying attention to where the dollars are going? Have we looked at the system properly and made sure that people are actually spending properly? We give a lot of programs money. Are they bringing back results? Are they? And that's why we have an auditor. So even though she's been doing some auditing, people frown. They almost don't want to know what's going on, but you should want.
But she doesn't do financial audits. She only does. Mm-hmm. She only does. I guess what you call procedural
right.
audits.
Right, but maybe we need another little additional program that checks where the finances are going. Because
Sarah,
it's important.
Sarah, what's the question that I haven't asked you that you'd like to speak to?
I guess one of the questions for me would be women's rights and being able to let people know that I think that, or I believe, that equality is something that not just women but all people deserve.
You hit an interesting nerve. I was watching TV the other day, Congress, in the U.S. Congress, and a Republican from Wyoming was very elegantly speaking about this bill to create a women's museum. Now, this was a bill to study the creation of a women's museum. And of course, she brought up one of my favorite persons, Dale Evans. Mm-hmm. And Dale had a special needs child, I think that they adopted. Mm-hmm. And when that child happened to pass away was when she wrote Happy Trails. Oh. And no one knows, but the fourth verse of Happy Trails talks about walking the trail with Christ. And that verse is never played. Now, this Republican lady, I was wondering if she'd ever have Mary Curly Flynn or Mother Jones in this museum. But why should we build a women's museum and spend that money? I mean, you know, if we're going to have a museum, I'm sure there's enough rich women today that could build the museum themselves.
You know, if you want to have, I guess, if some people feel that a museum addresses the issues they have around women's equality, but, you know, having been at one point in my own life a single mother, I'm not into just having things for the sake of having them. I mean, I think that definitively there are a lot of issues that happen around equality, certainly women's rights and their need to be able to do what's right for them, but not just us, but all people. You know, so I go back to, I don't necessarily know if that's the answer. I think the answer is that we have to educate people early on that people are people and that everyone is entitled.
The poor.
Yeah, they're entitled
including
to
the
help.
beggar.
Exactly. You're entitled to the same type of treatment. Good, bad, indifferent, but you're entitled to all the same things. Your neighbor, your friend down the street, it should not matter from where you come. It should matter that you're just a human being.
Sarah, it's very important at this stage of a campaign or of any campaign for people to associate, attach, and become part of that organization. Maybe you'd like to say a few words about your campaign and how people could reach you or become part of that campaign.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd love it. I'd love it if some people, you know, if people from Franklin or the surrounding towns would be willing to help me out in my campaign. We would welcome any type of help that we can get, whether it's phone banks, whether it's canvassing door to door, or just being there for moral support, holding signs. So, I mean, I think that I would love for all of you that might be watching today that you could contact me at info@electsaralynnreynolds.com, or you could call me at 508-761-9778, and we would just love to have you involved.
Sara-Lynn Reynolds, a candidate for State Senate.
Thank you so much for having me.
On the Democratic ticket. The primary is the
September 9th.
September 9th.
It's coming right up. It's less than 15 weeks away. Yeah.
Primary September 9th. And everyone here in Franklin votes at the field house. So on September 9th, which is a Tuesday, people that want to hold Sarah signs in front of the field house can do that. And we'll see you. Mark your calendar and make sure you check the candidates and check which ones you want to go on from the primary. So this is Frank Valvry and Sarah again saying thank you for coming down, and hopefully we'll do this again before the primary.
Oh, good. I would love to do that. I would love it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, great.